making the trip over from Vancouver, and to Carol, who's our new liaison with the provincial government. So welcome, both of you. We have quite a lot to go through, so we'll just get on, and we have a hard finish it just before 11:30, because Chris, I think, has to get 11:30, so we'll try and get done by 11:30.
Yeah, I have to get 11:30 ferry.
Yeah, usually 2 hours as well, so most we like to do. Morning.
Hi, Michelle.
Michelle.
Hi, how are you?
So, approval of the agenda, anybody got anything to say on that? Adoption of the minutes from last time?
Motion to approve.
Oh yes, motion to approve the agenda.
Seconded.
Seconded. Robin. Adoption of the minutes, minutes from the last meeting.
The only note that I had was super, super minor, so I don't know if it's even worth putting in there, but my action item was to create an invitation list for the Business Summit, and it was actually creating an invitation, not a list, so I don't know if that matters. But they are different things.
Yeah, very different.
Because I did not make a list.
Oh.
I'm counting on you to have a list.
I did. I went off the EDC mailing list.
Perfect.
But I'm probably going to try to get some of your construction workers onto that list.
Okay.
We can talk about that after.
Yeah.
And Steph, I have a couple names for you.
Excellent. Where is it then?
Oh shoot, sorry, I just read it and I should have marked it. Yeah, I'll find it and give it to you later, but that was the only minor thing for me. Motion to approve.
Yes, motion. Who? Someone proposed to approve the
second it.
minutes. Seconded. Rob. Okay. Public comments. Nobody here. So doing the public comments. Delegations. Okay, first. So we have around, I'd say, about an hour for your presentations, questions, and stuff. So take it away.
Great. Okay. So firstly, I'm really happy to be here, and I'll stand up until I feel like sitting down. I'll start standing up. So my name is Wes Regan. I'm the director of Simon Fraser University's Community Economic Development Programs. We have two programs that run out of my shop. One of them is a certificate program, which students come from around the province and around Canada, in fact, to come and learn how to apply community economic development principles and process in their communities. And the second program we have, which I'll highlight a little bit later, is called the Local Entrepreneurship Accelerator Program, or LEAP. And that's a program where we go out into communities and help build capacity and work with local small business owners and social enterprise and nonprofits on the issues that they're facing in their communities. I'm also the Community Economic Development Planner for the City of Vancouver, although just to be very clear, I'm wearing my SFU hat today and not my City of Vancouver hat. Likewise for my role with the Green Party of Canada, I'm the critic for municipal affairs for the Federal Party, and have worked in CEDs in 2009, mostly in Vancouver's downtown east side, but over the last couple of years I'm happy to say that I've been involved in more rural work, which I'm really excited about, and I'm a huge fan of Bowen Island. So I don't know if you can tell, but that photo there on the opening slide is from the north peak of Mount Gardner. So my wife and I hiked up there last year and enjoyed the view from the peak. So I wanted to start by just, I understand that there's been discussions around whether or not the municipality wants to hire a full-time staff person, or what kind of community economic development can be engaged in moving ahead here. So I wanted to start by just sort of differentiating traditional economic development from community economic development to sort of situate us in that. The traditional economic development that we're familiar with in major cities is really focused on firm attraction, typical business retention efforts, talent recruitment. So we hear about the creative class and Richard Florida and these sort of high-tech workers that we're chasing. And of course, city branding. A lot of effort has gone into city branding over the last 15, 20 years. And a lot of this is incentives based, so looking at tax breaks, often large investments in infrastructure, that sometimes can be sunk costs when Footloose Capital, quote unquote, decides it doesn't want to be in your tech park anymore, and the giant freeway and overpass you built for them is sitting there not doing anything. So these are some of the criticisms of traditional economic development, and I'm not here to throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of this type of thinking, but instead to present some critical observations about why this way of thinking about the economy has been criticized. And what we've found, and there's plenty of quantitative research to back this up, is that handing out tax breaks to large foreign corporations to try and lure them to your community doesn't always end well, and can cost municipalities a lot of money. Chasing talent, has its limitations as well. When you're trying to pull people to the community, instead of abiding by that old adage, love the one you got, love the one you're with. So, and what we found is that this oftentimes creates a race to the bottom type scenario where municipalities and regions are just trying to outdo one another, bending over backwards to try and attract these sort of large firms into communities. Last year, the program, actually might have been 2 years ago now, it was last year, but we wrote an open letter with about 40 or so of our, maybe almost 50 of our alumni to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities as it was going into its yearly convention, laying out some of the concerns we had about even just the narrative in which FCM's members has engaged in economic development, and how we wanted to see more community economic development language in that discussion. So I'm happy to share that open letter as well. It included all of our instructors and professors in the program and a bunch of our alumni who work in rural and urban communities across Canada. So now getting into what makes community economic development different. Firstly, it's about the process. It is a participatory process that's inclusive, and it's often driven by communities themselves. It seeks to leverage existing community strengths and assets while seeking to further build capacity and fill gaps locally. And it tends towards diversity, not monopoly, which in turn fosters local resilience and adaptability. We often hear about the single resource town where the only employer pulls out, or the markets change for a type of commodity, and then suddenly it's a mass exodus of jobs and empty houses. Well, that's problematic, of course. So it's an inclusive process. Oftentimes we'll find communities getting together and asking the types of questions: how do we best work together to get where we want to go? What is working currently that we could do more of? What pieces of the puzzle are we missing to meet the challenges that we see coming? How do we ensure everyone has access to opportunities to prosper in our community? And how do we best leverage the strengths and assets that we currently have to work with? So oftentimes these processes will include things like asset mapping, or engaging in discussions almost like a SWOT analysis in your community of what do we have to work with, and strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, as a starting point for looking at where action should take place. Bless you, Rob. One of the key principles that makes CED thinking different is the premium it places on local ownership of those assets, and the implications of ownership in terms of how money circulates in communities. So whether a business is locally owned or foreign owned, and that by foreign that could be Alberta or Saskatchewan, doesn't mean so far away.
Port Coquitlam.
Is it a cooperatively owned one, or is it a shareholder-driven big corporate one, with the head office somewhere else? And so we've seen community investment models that have grown over time to try and strengthen local ownership of assets, including investment cooperatives, crowdfunding as a new vehicle for investment, social enterprise, which the nonprofit sector has increasingly adopted in BC, and I'm happy to say that BC really is a leader internationally in the social enterprise space. And most recently, community contribution companies, which were created here in the province a few years ago, or community interest corporations, as they're known in other jurisdictions. And this is because research has shown over the years, and if you're interested in knowing more about this, Civic Economics is a firm in the United States has done a lot of research with regional government, local government, independent booksellers association, independent hardware store associations, in actually opening the books and looking at how money circulates differently when you have a foreign-owned, corporate-owned chain store with its consolidated supply chains and its centralized payment processing and legal and whatever else, versus an independent business that relies on the local accountant, the local payroll company, the local credit union, whatever it might be. And so they're circulating money in communities in very different ways. And the multiplier effect from the independent businesses has been seen to be 2.5 to 3 times higher in communities than the chain stores. And here in BC a few years ago, CUPE actually engaged in a campaign called the 10% Shift, which was looking at the implications of buying local in terms of generating revenue for municipalities, and of course what that meant for CUPE staff who rely on those revenues. So what we've seen over the years is a lot of efforts in communities to celebrate and promote buying local as a strong pillar of community economic development programming, if you will. So here in BC, of course, we've got the BC Buy Local campaign. In a smaller, more rural context, one of our graduates from the program, Amy Corey, started Small Town Love up in Prince George, and so just smaller communities are really celebrating the diverse, unique types of businesses in that context. And in Portland and in Austin, Texas as well, we had the Keep Austin Weird campaign and the Keep Portland Weird campaign, which were very much about celebrating the diverse, unique type of neighborhood cultures that small businesses create that make those neighborhoods interesting, worth visiting, distinct, and fun. So at SFU, one of the programs we offer that I mentioned earlier is the LEAP program, the Local Entrepreneurship Accelerator Program. And this program really seeks to help build capacity in rural communities with small business owners. Over the last couple of years, we've also had nonprofits who have been looking to create new sorts of revenue models that are based on social enterprise development. We just recently had our LEAP cohort up on the Sunshine Coast nearby. You can see on the bottom left here, this is at the Gibson's Public Market, which I'll talk a little bit more later. But we had about a dozen entrepreneurs from the Sunshine Coast developing a range of businesses or upscaling and just further developing existing businesses. And we take them through an 8-week intensive program that really invites them to dig deep and question some of the assumptions they've made about their businesses or about their market, to look at the operational needs of their businesses and really where they want to go with this and how it fits in the community in terms of strengthening their neighborhood or their region. Something else that makes CED different is the values that go into it. It's not solely about money, but about other forms of community wealth building as well, including social, cultural, or environmental wealth. It can often include an equity lens, and oftentimes CED has grown in parallel with civil rights movements in the United States, particularly for inner city communities, racialized communities that have found themselves lacking in services and lacking investment, their neighborhoods being redlined from investment. So there's been particularly in the American experience of CED, close parallel with the social justice movements in inner cities. Here in Canada, and the SFU CED program in particular, I'm very pleased to say, has similarly adopted an equity and justice approach, but in particular through a reconciliation lens. And just recently, we worked with the Tides Canada Foundation, who generously offered up a subsidized sponsored tuition program for students who are coming in from rural communities, particularly around the Skeena watershed. And so we have students from Kiskayok and Hazelton and a lot of smaller communities who've come down to take the certificate program and who will be heading back there, looking to diversify their employment base and diversify their economy in general there. And so along that line, one of the things that makes CED different is outcomes and measurement. We're not just purely looking at things like GDP or GNP or even just productivity numbers or employment numbers, because life is more nuanced than that. And so a lot of times the aim of community economic development is not to ask what we can do for the economy to grow GDP or to grow whatever it is, but what is the economy doing for us? Is the economy making life better for people in our communities? Is the economy making people work more than they want to or need to? Is the economy providing everything we need, or is it accumulating and some people having a lot while a lot of other people have nothing? What's happening there? Is it taking an undue toll on the environment? Are we losing access to natural capital in our communities because of the drive for growth and for a single bottom line type of thinking? So community economic development, the way we value and measure things has been communicated in different ways. A few of these here are Rawson's Donut on the left, which is developed in the UK. In the middle, something closer to home. This is demonstrating value, which often works with social enterprise and nonprofits to blend how you evaluate your program in terms of keeping it financially sustainable, but also how's your mission being communicated along that line too. And not to get too high level here, but switching the way we think about even measuring our national economic health in terms of looking at things like the genuine progress indicator as opposed to GDP, which would tell us far more about how well people are living and how the economy is helping to power those sort of outcomes. So really thinking about prosperity differently. It's not just about how much money is in the economy. It's about what is the economy doing for people in our community. So here are some case studies that I wanted to touch on. So I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we talk about in community economic development is leveraging what we have, looking at the assets and strengths that the community has. So here's an example of how that's been done in Cleveland. In Cleveland, there's what's called the Evergreen Cooperatives, which are a collection of inner-city cooperatives that have social procurement agreements with major anchor institutions. So universities, hospitals, these really large employers that have big and ongoing purchasing needs. And the reason why it's so attractive to leverage anchor institutions like this is that they're going to be in communities for a long time. There's been a lot of public investment in putting them there. They play an absolutely crucial role in the community. And so that their purchasing needs will be sustained, unlike perhaps a private venture, which may, if for example, a tax break is handed to it from another community down the road, it might leave. That's more likely to happen than a hospital suddenly leaving, or a university for that matter. So what they've done is they've provided some of the food services, laundry services, things like that, and that's creating a lot of employment in inner city communities, in particular for racialized minorities who are having troubles accessing employment opportunities. An interesting example of community investment. So another one of the types of actions that I touched on is a cooperative neighborhood investment model started in Minneapolis, the Northeastern Investment Cooperative. And this is where a community came together and said, we're really missing a couple of these types of businesses that would really make our neighborhood more complete. And we think they might also draw some folks to the area and spend their bucks here locally. So they invested in their own microbrewery and a bakery and really enlivened this block that was very underdeveloped.
But they priorities right.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, beer and bread.
Definitely. And so this model actually, shortly afterwards, neighborhoods in New York created the New York Real Estate Investment Cooperative, looking at what Minneapolis had done. But in the context of actually then losing the types of businesses that they were cherishing in their communities that they knew were under threat from speculation or rising lease rates. So they've been pooling their resources in New York, particularly with an arts and culture lens to retain things like bookstores or studio spaces or whatever else, building on what Minneapolis has done. A good rural case study from Manitoba is Aki Energy, and Sean Loney is a leading social entrepreneur here in Canada. I've got his book here. I'm going to leave it with you guys. I've got two books I want to leave with you that I generously donate to the municipality of Bowen Island, and you can fight amongst yourselves for whoever gets to read it first. But and this is touched on in the book here. Aki Energy looked at strengths and gaps in rural communities in Manitoba, particularly around the food system and around the rates of diabetes and other health, like chronic health-related issues, and looked at the toll on government that was taking in the healthcare system. And what Sean and his partners in Manitoba said is, we need to be investing in preventative measures in our communities to save tax dollars, and we can do that through social enterprise models that look at instead of subsidizing food that's coming in, they're selling it at the northern store, and not only is it expensive, but oftentimes it's high carb, not very healthy food. What they said is we can grow healthy local food here and we can create jobs in Manitoba doing that. So they took a two-pronged approach with ACCI where it looked at energy sovereignty and looking at solar, geothermal, and other forms of sustainable energy, developing these energy companies, and also looking at the food system and developing not only food-based social enterprises to fill gaps in the dietary system, food system, but to create good jobs for First Nations residents in the areas there. Another example close to home is the Gibson's Public Market, which of course just launched a few months ago, really. And here they're showcasing great local producers of whether it's cheese or fishmonger. It's just a really cute market, and also a special events space on the second floor where earlier I shared that LEAP program. That's where that took place, was in the special events space. They also have an educational sort of marine biology display area, which is really cool and worth checking out. So they made this a cool destination open market concept that celebrates their local entrepreneurial community, particularly their agricultural traditions on the island.
Did you say that's a cooperative, or how does that form?
So this was Risa Capital was involved in this, along with Community Futures. So they did pool. It's a public-private partnership essentially. So they worked together with Community Futures and with Risa, which is a community investment firm that Brian Smith and a few others up there have started. And if you're interested in knowing more about how they did this, I think I made an introduction to Brian Smith already, so he'd be one of the people to talk to about that. And then another similar example, once again drawing on food, is the Zingerman's Delicatessen, which is a great case study in, once again, local community saying, hey, we're kind of lacking a few things here, and they started their own deli at a time when delis were going out of business in Michigan. Had a few really great products, and then from there they started developing their own specialty lines of goods, and these have been embraced in the northeastern U.S. as like the consummate sort of Christmas present type stocking stuffer, jams and jellies and salsas and whatever else they make. So they looked at their own supply chain and said, we could buy these things from other communities, or we could just start making them here, because we know we buy them all the time anyhow to put in our sandwiches and put in our salads. So they looked at a sort of vertical integration model where they relied on themselves essentially. And so improving local self-reliance or enhancing local self-reliance is often one of the other sort of terms that we'll hear in community economic development. And in the US there's an organization actually called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which has a lot of great research on community economic development. So what's the role of government in all this, you might be asking, as a local government? So I kind of wanted to touch on this and just share a couple of the ways in which local government in particular has been involved in community economic development, because CED really hasn't been embedded in local government the same way that traditional, firm attraction, city competitiveness type economic development has. And in my role in Vancouver, we're still trying to link up this sort of work that the Vancouver Economic Commission does at a broader, bigger scale with the type of work that I do in a neighborhood context, looking at local economies in our different neighborhoods in Vancouver. But CED is not really about what government can do, quote unquote, so much as it's about how government can be a better partner with communities to do things together. So the Gibson's Public Market is a great example. That was people coming together, good process, and a mix of public and private involvement. So municipalities, of course, can engage in direct granting. Municipalities, of course, can own land and can designate that land for a specific type of project. a guarantor of last resort, so de-risking community lending sometimes. In the past we've seen municipalities do, or issuing municipal bonds to pay for, to finance a type of project or infrastructure need. There's also policy changes, so cities have adopted things like big box, no big box stores. We want to protect our diversity of small independent businesses and grocery stores. Social procurement, saying, we as a municipality, we buy a lot of stuff, so can we buy from social enterprise? Can we buy from First Nations owned businesses? And of course there are some barriers related to trade issues in terms of procurement, but we're working right now to try and find the opportunities to maximize the social impact that purchasing can create in cities across Canada. And then lastly, and Vancouver actually is a good case study in particular for this in Canada, is community benefits agreements, which do leverage development. So if a major development is going to happen on Bowen Island at some point, what's the opportunity to work with that developer and their construction contractors and subcontractors to really try and accomplish some things in the community that residents here want to see done. Who needs jobs right now? Who needs to be trained up? Who needs to be given opportunities? And what kind of businesses can really benefit from that development? And so investing in a staff person or an organization to ensure that this sort of work is not done off the side of someone's desk is worth considering. And I understand that Bowen is questioning, these sort of things and how to invest in this, or where to invest in this, or whether to invest in this possibly. And I think that it's important to note that a lot of the value in community economic development is derived from engaging and investing in good process. Just good process that's inclusive, that's empowering of communities, that's transparent, and by doing so is seen as a genuine type form of engagement that makes it more sustainable in the long run. And that's important if you actually want to implement and monitor any type of a strategy or plan that you come up with in your community. So getting that community buy-in, because at the end of the day with a CED strategy, it's important that the community take ownership of it, and it's not something that's solely driven by local government or an agency for that matter. So process to involve them and to foster a sense of ownership and pride in that, and commitment is important. And so, in conclusion, we know that rural communities can have complex challenges and opportunities. We know that investing in strategic planning is good, but that also needs investment into strategic partnerships in order to implement and sustain the types of grand visions that we were able to come up with together. We first need to answer what precisely it is that we want to do. Why does that matter? Then, how do we do that? And this is all part of the process of engaging and unpacking these things together. And then lastly, it's important who takes the lead in the community for that thing. So is it something that's owned by a chamber? Is it something that's owned by a nonprofit? And how do we get others, to be on board and implementing that together? And not to say that any one organization, drives it and takes ownership of it. It takes a village. But at the end of the day, we have to find ways to be accountable to one another and to set up a framework for partnerships so that it's very clear about who's doing what and what sort of milestones there are and how we be accountable to each other. And lastly, if you do hire someone to work at Bowen Island, I hope it will be one of our alumni in the program. We have many. And for more information, you can visit sfu.ca/CED and learn more about our current and past students and what the program has to offer. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I look very forward to hearing any questions.
Talk a little bit more about how the kind of is there tension between the community economic development and the other economic development? For example, suppose we got together here and everyone in the community thought we would like to have affordable organic food or something like that. There's already on this island at the general store, and there's a more expensive, much more expensive sort of organic store. I can see that those businesses would not be too happy about that. How does that?
Sure. So I think that once again comes down to the process piece, because if there was some sort of a community engagement process and people were like, we want a more affordable organic food, I think an important starting point would be like, well, we have these 2 grocery stores. How do we do that with what we have to work with? And are they interested in being a part of that? And so it's that list again of what is it that we want to do, why do we want to do that, and how, why, or how, who. So working with what you have is, I think, really crucial in terms of like that's your starting point. And if you don't have that, then it's the conversation about how do we fill that gap. And it could be maybe you do need to attract someone to come here, or it could be maybe we have some capacity building and some infrastructure to put in place to fill that gap on our own. But I think it comes down to the types of questions that you ask in that process and identifying what it is you have to work with first.
Are there very many models that local governments doing microfinancing or those grant programs for entrepreneurs that you're aware of in Canada?
I'm not, in terms of direct granting, our experience in Vancouver, for example, prohibits us from granting to privately owned businesses. So our granting is focused largely in the nonprofit and social enterprise sector. So the question of the role of nonprofit retail or social enterprise retail in filling community retail or other types of light industrial gaps is an interesting question that's arisen lately, and we're seeing more and more of these social enterprises in Vancouver fulfilling community retail and light industrial needs. But for the microfinance piece too, I mean, we've done things like facade grant programs and revitalization programs have used revitalization tax exemptions that are allowable under the charter, both for local government and Vancouver charter. But there hasn't been a lot of type of like direct financing of this stuff from municipalities that I'm aware of. Municipal bonds have been used for certain projects. That is probably the most common form of financing for anything. Otherwise, it's been, in Vancouver again, we relied a lot on Vancity Community Foundation and Vancity Credit Union to do a lot of the type of investment into the private sector space with businesses that are trying to achieve social impact. And so the relationship between a municipality and a credit union or a lending institution, I think, can be a very important thing to further explore, and what tools you have at your disposal. Earlier I did mention that the tax break subsidy model, of course, is often criticized. But I don't think that that means it should be thrown out the window, because it's one of the few tools municipalities really have in terms of or changing mill rates or whatever it is that that we have to work with. So the financing issue I leave largely to the credit unions and banks, and unless you're talking about using municipal bonds for a large scale project, there's not a lot beyond granting to nonprofits and social enterprise that I'm aware of. But I could look into that further and see if any of our other folks in the program have some examples.
Or even loan programs where there's low interest rate loans available.
Yeah,
for entrepreneurs or startups.
I can't give an answer on that one off the top of my head. I believe that there are some examples. I mean, I know once again in Vancouver it's been de-risking. So instead of the municipality lending, the municipality says, well, we'll guarantee, you get the loan from the bank and we'll put something in escrow, or we'll put it in whatever,
Right.
And that can help. So municipality's not necessarily lending directly, but it's saying, we'll backstop at least maybe half of this or something, you're going to, and that's been a way to de-risk some types of investment.
You mentioned light industrial as one of the areas. So are there specific light industrial projects that you have in mind when you say that? Or?
Yeah, so a good example of light industrial in a social enterprise context would be something like take TradeWorks, which is a social enterprise in Vancouver, started probably close to at least 20 years old. And they actually built a lot of, so they do a lot of woodworking, they build a lot of furniture, they built the podiums and a lot of the gift boxes for the Olympics in Vancouver in 2010. And so they operate on light industrial space, in Strathcona, and they teach people about barriers to employment, woodworking skills, and like shop skills, and increases their employability, in other types of and they sustain themselves largely on something. So BC Housing, for example, has bought furniture from TradeWorks, and that's a good social procurement example of like government supporting a social enterprise. And I think the Olympics in general, a lot of good social procurement examples happen through the games. So that would be an industrial example. Is there another one I can draw from?
We actually had one thinking about on Bowen around our tourism industry, where when we were starting initially last year with moving forward an idea called Villages of Venue to kind of consolidate a bunch of different services and offerings so that Bowen Island could remain the way it looks but actually act like a hotel. And so a couple of the things that came out from there was one was a laundry, the idea of a laundry co-op, and either running it as an enterprise or running it as a co-op. And so that one was that, these are still kind of bubbling away and still in the books a little bit. And the other one was a procurement and storage place for large bulk supplies that we have to go off island to bring in, but to be able to bring them in here and then create like a shared storage spot so that bed and breakfast operators don't have to buy 400 toilet paper rolls when they go to town, but they can invest in a common pot of toilet paper rolls and help themselves to them, that they're stored somewhere on the island, which means you don't have to travel into the city as much. So those would be like examples actually of light industrial stuff that would require some light industrial zoning from the municipality in order to have them happen, and it's kind of a simple thing to set up with a group of cooperative owners or as a membership model.
Those are both great ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the barriers to getting those things up and running? Is it the zoning?
Yeah, I think part of it is the organization piece around, like tourism operators have 6 months where they can't do anything to think about infrastructure because they're like busy operating, and then the rest of the time is like in the downtime. So it's like part of it was getting organized. I think the thought was even having the laundry down at we have this little building that you see when you just walk off the ferry there. There was one spot in there that was going to be used for the laundry.
Which building?
Rondi's building, the utility.
The new building?
Yeah, the boathouse, because it's got some light industrial uses.
This is kind of partly why we were thinking about this position, because I think the amount of energy and organisation that is required for this type of process is considerable. So that's why we thought having somebody who was, and it would be it would include the tourism part.
Yeah.
Would be very powerful.
When you talk about the impact of the economy on the community rather than the other way around, that's kind of like fits right into the kinds of issues that we struggle with here. And the impact of tourism on the community, we're becoming one of those communities that's just like, massively impacted by what happens here, and we're starting to ask questions around like, how do we manage that? How do we get value added from that? And for me, it's also about like how can our community better benefit from that as a community, not as a local economy per se. Yeah. But to take that CED approach first.
So there's an active tourism like master plan, isn't there, for the island? Or is there something that is guiding that tourism?
There is a plan that was put together with Cooperation Destination BC. I think it's a couple years old now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's probably been more successful than anyone imagined.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And it's victims of our own success. So in the summertime, it's rather grim for residents and can be for some tourists.
We don't have enough capacity.
So is that like, they're flooding off the ferry and all of a sudden the village is just overrun with?
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, there's no real
There's no food
there's no real process around the tourism strategy. You know, maybe it was done with Destination BC, but the community has not been involved. And so the tourism promotion is unconnected with what the residents want, and I think the residents are feeling a little resentful about the number of tourists and the way it's been done in some respects.
Especially in regards to infrastructure, I think that's the tough piece, because when all of the residents and tourists rely on infrastructure being the ferries, and then also somewhat the bus system. So with the extra tourists, it just really interrupts how people do things, so.
And even our stores and restaurants, I mean, the restaurants run on food.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
This is like almost like what we need is like a pop-up more. Do you know what I mean? It's like pop-up capacity. That on certain weekends there could be a few more food. Like if we had like 8 food trucks or something that showed up, that it could absorb those kinds of things. Or if we had the ability for you know, like like expandable taxi service or an expandable bus service or something that would meet with demands and that kind of stuff. It's like, how could we grow the capacity like a jellyfish, right? It gets bigger when it eats, and
It's also it's a kind of complex question, because you continue to grow the capacity, like you could continue to build more roads for more traffic, but there's also a question of what kind of tourists are you attracting, and what's the brand of the island to promote those tourists. It needs to be more considered, I think, so that we attract tourists who are spending more time here, doing things that are more compatible with the brand and the wishes of the residents. So it's not just a question of building suddenly more capacity. That's why I think having the process of the community involvement in saying things would be really powerful.
I don't think Tourismville and Island would be, averse to that kind of input at all.
No, I don't think so.
It's just
I think
creating
it's
the
just a matter
space
of
for it to
energy,
happen.
and I think they'd be really open to it. You know, I think it's just.
I am actually going to work with them in the new year on the villages anyway.
Good.
Too. But because I think now they're realizing like it is massively successful. It was mostly a marketing campaign. So, we get lots of people over here. We've got some great products to bring them in. We've got some good brochures and really good, even stuff that talks about our values. Like it's pretty clear when you're coming over here what you're coming into. And that makes it just all the more attractive for people that are looking for something that's not Whistler or it's not, So I think you're right. Like I think we're at a place where people would be more willing to open up that conversation and say, how can the community help guide and design what are the flexibility in our tourism capacity, the flexibility in, because an economy like this, it's not, you don't want to build more road, you don't want to build more permanent infrastructure for tourists. You want to build flexible infrastructure because the rhythms are way out of our control. Like we don't control the rhythms, but we can become like a salt marsh and absorb the flood.
I'm not sure that that could be the case, but there's other examples out there in tourism where people have successfully controlled the ebb and flow of tourism. Whistler is an amazing example because Whistler 10 years ago had very little summer traffic, and now their summer businesses are equal to their, not bigger than their winter business. So we could do much more to make this an all-year-round place. Like things like having the village as a venue and having small events and workshops and things that would draw people in the winter time.
Yeah.
Just a couple of points. You asked about the obstacles to the light industrial and whether zoning was an issue. And we're currently in it's not the beginning stages. The draft bylaws are there for zoning part of our community lands as light industrial. So, for example, space in that area for a cooperative toilet paper business. That could fit in there. And the hope is to get the zoning completed for that area and the community consultation done before our term is up. So that's in the works. The other thing that's almost unique about Bowen Island is that we don't have a business licensing program. Our businesses come and go, and one of the major pieces of work that we did in the past year in this committee was to conduct a feasibility study for business licensing, and it was presented to council and accepted. And at our strat planning session last week, the decision was made to go forward with business licensing. So that's helpful in terms of getting a better sense of what the actual landscape is here, because a lot of it is anecdotal, and in many instances all we really see are the folks who are bricks and mortar businesses or who are actively advertising their services to a local audience, but there's a lot more than that going on here. The third point is that in terms of tax breaks for businesses, our residential and our commercial tax rates are the same, and that's unusual as well. As far as sort of getting around the island, TransLink has actually been looking at a number of small pilot projects that would make Bowen more accessible to its residents, but also to visitors. So there's a pilot program that is apparently going to go ahead. We don't quite know the shape of it yet, for an on-demand bus service using current capacity. And the second thing that they're looking at, this is a little less far along, is expanding the Handy Dart service over here, so that that could also help with at least residents moving around. And then just the last point, the food trucks and the pop-up capacity. Our land use bylaw prohibits food trucks. And in discussion with some of the local residents, they weren't keen on having food trucks over here unless there was a business licensing program in place. So if pop-up food trucks actually would be a good thing for us to do, if we're moving forward with business licensing, then some sort of recommendation from this group to council saying, you know, given the challenges we faced in the past year, could you please revisit that part of the land use bylaw? It's a very specific change. It wouldn't take much to alter it. I don't think, it's not an OCP amendment, it's a land use bylaw amendment. I mean,
and also maybe
do it.
having some piece supporting local businesses doing it rather than opening it up to having people from the mainland.
Maureen, question. Is that licensing, or does that include home-based businesses?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Just how far down it drills is something that municipal staff are figuring out. So for instance, one of the conversations we had, I think at this table, was you know, if somebody's making craft items for sale at the farmer's market or Christmas market or something like that, do you really want to pull them into a licensing system? So staff will look at that and figure out what their capacity is and kind of support. They'll need, likely, we'll figure out some alternative. I think one of the things we found was when we were looking at how other communities handle that kind of thing, in at least one community, it was the market that got the license. And if you were part of the market, you didn't have to get a license personally. So.
You guys have good problems.
Yeah.
These are good problems to have. It's not bad problems. And it sounds like there's actually, like, you've identified a lot of work that could happen. So I wasn't quite sure, like, I was going over, like, what to hear, and it's all like some really good, these are really good ideas. And I really do think that whether it's an organization locally, or whether it's a staff person, it sounds to me like someone's got to, like, own this and do it, because it doesn't strike me as stuff that should be done just off the side of people's desks.
How could this fit in? I've heard of other, oh, did you want to say anything, Cheryl?
I just, Shana actually. So I'm just really interested in some of the first things that Wes said about self-reliance and alternative thinking about prosperity and progress. And so I just have a couple of questions. First of all, I'm really interested in what the metrics are for genuine progress indicators versus GDP and kind of how you measure alternative ideas of prosperity and progress. And secondly, I'm really interested in ACME Energy, that example, because in some ways on the island we're incredibly self-reliant, and in other ways the island's limitations are our major constraints. And so I'm thinking specifically about energy. We pay 3 times more than they do in West Vancouver for our energy, and food, we pay extraordinarily high costs for food, and internet, we have kind of last century connectivity, and I think those are major barriers to business, and also just increase the cost of living on the island, decrease the standard of living. And so I'm really interested in ACME Energy, which tackles energy and food at the same time.
So, great questions. I don't know if you can see it on the screen.
Shanna, are you watching this as well? I just sent you a link.
Oh, sorry, no, I'm just listening.
Okay, I sent you a link about half an hour ago to the video, if you want to look at the graphic that
Sure, okay.
Right. So the genuine progress indicator, a lot of this stems from the United Nations development goals. So for years and years, going back to the Ottawa Convention, like the early 80s, and the Brundtland Report, even before that, we started having these conversations about what do we mean by sustainability, and we started out having that thought, well, maybe it's the stool with the 3 legs. And as time has gone by, the type of indicators have sort of grown and become a little more complex. And so just to list off some examples, the genuine progress indicator looks at social, economic, and environmental indicators. And so things like lost leisure time or rates of education in your community, looking at crime and family breakdown, in communities. That's on the social side. On the environmental side, looking at things like net loss of farmland or forests or noise pollution, the rates of complaints about noise pollution or air pollution or water pollution in an area. And in terms of economic, looking at income inequality. So it's not enough to say if GDP is growing, to more specifically answer your question, if GDP is growing, that doesn't tell us if it's growing equitably. And so income distribution is an important way of verifying, well, if GDP is growing, is this a good thing, or is it all accruing to 1% of people on Bowen Island? Not that I think that's likely, but this is what we've been seeing at a macroeconomic scale, across the world, is that the economy has grown, exponentially in the last few decades.
So it's not enough to say if GDP is growing.
Oh, me echoing?
No, she just
She's
looked
watching
at the
you now.
video.
Oh. So GDP is a very simplistic and incomplete indicator of really how well a community is doing. One of the best things in terms of Vancouver's GDP is for a major earthquake. So if we're measuring economic success by GDP, that's how much money exchanged hands, in Vancouver, how much insurance payouts happened after the earthquake, how much new stuff was bought to repair and rebuild all the buildings. Doesn't take into account the human devastation, the loss of lives, the emotional toll in the community. So if you're using things like GDP to measure economic success in the community, you're just purely looking at a single bottom line, which is just how much money was exchanging hands in that circumstance. So the genuine progress indicator has been increasingly adopted at a larger, not necessarily at a community scale, but more at a national or international type scale. And a lot of it stems from the United Nations Development Program and the work they've done on the indicators that they work with. But if you want a municipal example that draws from this, the Healthy City Strategy that the City of Vancouver adopted also draws from the UN indicators and is very similar to the genuine progress indicator. So that looks at, in terms of the economy, there's the making ends meet and working well portion of it, and also being and feeling safe and included in our communities in terms of the types of businesses and services that are there for residents. So if you want to look at the Healthy City strategy, I mean, that's the overarching social sustainability plan for the city of Vancouver. The point I'm trying to make here is that you can look at the economy, if you just purely look at the economy in terms of money and growth, you're not going to be answering the question of really what's ultimately happening to people in their communities. You'll be answering the question of, is the economy growing? And if all we care about is the economy growing, then we're not going to care about the resource depletion, the unequal distribution of wealth, the stress on communities that are facing higher levels of household debt, or working longer hours to keep up in a busier economy. So that's sort of the point I'm trying to make, is that we need to do a better job of bridging the way we think about the economy and the types of outcomes the economy should power. Because if the only outcome we care about is growth in GDP, we're in trouble. And right now we're in trouble. We know that, globally. So our thinking on the economy needs to evolve at the macro scale, and I think the aggregate effect of communities thinking differently about how we measure community wealth and how we measure the impact of our economy can help in that bigger work.
It's really interesting.
Not to get too theoretical and like academic here, but
you look all around that wheel, it doesn't mention housing anywhere.
Yeah, but and so the United Nations indicators do, like, this is.
Okay.
I just use these as examples of like how what we measure matters.
Right.
So you look at the UN, and that includes definitely housing or shelter, and it includes 23 indicators, I think. Have a look at them though, but that is increasingly where we're drawing the monitoring, the indicators are coming from that work.
We have time for a couple more questions. Only we could obviously talk about this all morning.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, because a lot of people would prefer not to.
It's really, you're speaking to the choir here.
Yeah.
So just a couple more
just to
questions.
build off the last one, and Robin, maybe this is what you were going to ask about as well, but one of the other main challenges that Bowen is having is with housing. So we have this increase in tourism. How do we work with it and make it work for us? And then also housing everywhere in Vancouver. Obviously, affordability is an issue. There's less available houses that are less affordable. So then you have labor shortages, which affect our businesses. So I guess my question is, do you have any examples of CED that's happened where the municipality or government has been able to successfully integrate housing into the CED plan, and how that was done, and things that we could look at to model ourselves after?
Yeah, even in Vancouver, we're only beginning to really make that link. The way we talk, and not only housing, but the way we talk about transportation and transit. So we're building housing that's accessible to transit with our transit-oriented development. Is that close to where people need to work? Are we building too much housing on employment lands? Do we need to retain our industrial lands, for job spaces? But I think some good examples, in Whistler, when Ken Melamed was mayor and that council up there, they had a really interesting, it's like a land trust model that they developed, where there's a long-term covenant on land that was built specifically, for affordable housing for the workforce there. And I think that's an interesting model to look at, is what Whistler did to try and address their housing there. Not to say there's a silver bullet, they still have housing challenges throughout the entire Pemberton, Squamish. It's growing so fast and there's so much pressure. But that is an interesting model, and Vancouver subsequently has now adopted a land use or a land trust model as well to build affordable housing. We've also seen, in Vancouver, the relationship between the social housing that's provided and the social enterprises that have been developed on the ground. And so trying to increasingly link up appropriate types of services and businesses that are often run by nonprofits. And so that connection is being made pretty clearly in Vancouver. I'm trying to think of any other examples. Actually, on the island, oh boy, it's right by Victoria. One of the First Nations there is really doing some innovative stuff around housing. I'm trying to remember which First Nations it is.
Esquimalt?
I think it is the Esquimalt, yeah. So look at what they're doing maybe as well, because they've been doing some good stuff. That's right, that's quite a lot.
My question kind of builds on that. Do you know of any examples of communities using like a community development corporation or that kind of model successfully? I guess in like a smaller community.
Yeah, I mean, in the BC context, I don't think we've seen a lot of community development corporations like formal CDCs in BC. I mean, you look at the immediate urban example, Portland Hotel Society in Vancouver operates very similar to a CDC, I think. Anyways, it has the social enterprises that provide all the goods and services they need for their housing. We're talking about thousands of people, housed by them. Skill development training programs, peer supported employment for their people. So they operate very much like an inner city, CDC. But I'm trying to. There's one that's coming to mind. I can follow up with this, but I'm just trying to remember the case study. It's just American. There's good American examples of CDCs, and oftentimes they'll combine housing. Actually, in Edmonton, there's a really good CDC model. We look Martin Gerber, Conrad, I think. But you look at the Edmonton Foundation and the Edmonton Poverty Reduction Plan. They recently formed a community development corporation where the city of Edmonton gave them, I think it's about $20 million in property, and also gave them a few $1 million in operating funds. And what they've done is they're building a mix of housing, and they're combining. It's a mixed commercial and residential real estate portfolio in Edmonton. With social enterprise retail playing a component there. So you want to look at a good CDC model that's not too far from home, that Edmonton model might be worth checking out.
Can I ask just a very quick question, probably we need to wrap up, but very crassly, how much does it cost to hire a CED officer, and should they be employed within the municipality or should they be outside of, because this, what we've heard is it's not really government initiative here, it's more government acting as a good partner. Should this person be employed outside of the municipality, say, I don't know, maybe the Boeing Foundation, to promote this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I'm reticent to try and give any sort of a definitive answer, but my gut tells me that you've got a lot to work with, and so once again, you don't. In order to have a good process to get a strategy or plan, you don't necessarily need to hire someone in-house to do that. Like you could tender that and just be clear about the types of things that you want there, and an organization or consultants could possibly come in, and we've got really great people in BC who could come in and help with that. But I think the question is like, how does it get implemented? And that's where the staff question, comes up, because maybe it's not a full-time position, maybe it is a part-time position. Maybe it's not a staff person, maybe it's an organization that's given some resources to own it and like hold the pieces together. We were talking earlier, it was 1,001 ways or 101 ways to skin a cat. So I think it's, I'm a big fan of seeing municipalities hire someone to be a dedicated staff person to do this work, but I understand that there's competition for resources and you've got to justify that to taxpayers. So I think you just look at the amount of work, and does the work plan become more clear? Like how many hours of work does it look like to do this? And does that warrant a staff position? And if so, is it full-time or is it part-time? Or is it like a coordinator role that you work with the foundation or someone and you grant them some resources that they can hire a coordinator, staff person, or someone to implement these things with your partners. I think it's important too to draw from the resources of those other partners that are there, so it's not all on that staff person. Like that staff person is, don't think of them as like an administrative role so much as like they're convening, they're facilitating, they're pulling the resources and the people together, and your community partners can do a lot of the implementing so long as everyone's just on the same page about what's happening, where it's going, and that person can be integral to just making sure everyone's on the same page, and they do some administrative functions perhaps, where maybe they do take note-taking and they do make sure that the lines of communication are open. and they make sure that we're avoiding duplication. But I think really think of them, like their role is to unlock the partnership potential of those other partners that implement this stuff together. It's not so much that they're the person doing everything and like, you know, administering everything. It's more that they're like a glue that binds this thing together. That's a better way perhaps of thinking of that position. Whether that's internal or external, I think that it comes back to like the role they play. And it's important, I think, that they don't get like, if you are to hire a staff person in the city, they should be spending more time in the community than they are up here. You know, they should be really embedded in community ideally, which is why, whether it's an internal staff person or you're just granting to the foundation or someone else for them to hire someone, and you have a liaison, or maybe this committee works closely with whatever community working group. You know, there's a number of different ways to pull everyone together, and I think you just need to work through a process of thinking which one of those makes the most sense, which one's maybe the most bang for your buck and would be most effective, and what you can ultimately justify to your tax-paying residents.
Okay.
But I think the value of having someone do that, I hope would be clear, and you've got a lot to work with. So I think there needs to be someone that's helping to hold that together.
You keep saying foundation, you're talking about the community foundation?
Yeah, the Bowen is the Bowen Foundation.
Yeah.
Whoever it
Bowen
is.
Community Foundation?
I think it's just,
Yeah, just as an
mentioned, it's just
example.
as an
It's just
example of a
as an
nonprofit,
example.
an external,
Yeah.
Yeah.
external organization
Could be,
outside of
could be
the
anyone, but just as an example, you know. So I'm really quite pleased with. We have a process right now in Vancouver where we worked with the Vancity Community Foundation and granted through them to an organization that brought about 35 different community groups together, looking at all the different challenges and opportunities in the downtown east side. So they have a full-time director and a coordinator, and I regularly attend those meetings. Sometimes we'll have other counselors or staff attend those meetings. And we came up with the strategy together. The city granted them about $375,000 for a couple of quick start projects and for some feasibility research for some bigger, more ambitious projects. But they implement it and they own it and they drive it. And I think one of the reasons why it will continue to live on in community is because it's with them. Because governments change, mandates change, but communities have a little bit of a longer timeline. And so if you can come up with a process where you're empowering them and you're giving them the resources to implement this thing long term, I think that's a better model on the whole.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Yes, sure.
Well, I think
Any final?
we really, if we're going to do any of the other stuff, I think.
I have just a burning, I think, quick summary question. And that is, we talked since I joined the Economic Development Committee here for a year about changing the name to Community Economic Development Committee. And I've been caught up with not having the right one-sentence elevator pitch. Why should we change the name? You know, when talking to a member of the public, why should we change the name to a Community Economic Development Committee? And I'm just like,
that's it. I think that's the answer.
So, well, but you imagine I'm talking to someone on the street.
Economics is 1/3 of the pie, right? You say we actually want to add the other 2 parts of the pie. Like that, am I, sorry to...
Totally. I think that's a great answer. And I wonder what Wes would say if you were approached by someone on the street asking that. Yeah.
Well, I think the simplest thing to distill it down to is that local economic development is talking about a place. Community economic development is talking about the people. And so if you want an economic development strategy that's concerned with the people, call it a community economic development strategy. If, you know, you know, that the community economic development is important in the distinction because, you know, it is the people that will drive it forward. It is the community that will drive it forward. It's not just a top-down initiative. It's from the grassroots up. And so the question again, what's the role of local government? Is that, well, how do we be a good partner so that we can resource community, we can align our policies, think about our land use planning to unlock the potential of the partnerships and the, you know, the upscaling that can happen in that community. And it's more that partnership model. And at the end, it's about the people. You have great people in Bowen, and you know, let's unlock the potential they have to thrive.
Thanks.
That's a great answer.
That's a good pitch.
Thank you. Yeah.
you very much, Wes. That was really great. We should have had you here 2 years ago. That's been really enlightening. So thanks very much for taking the trouble, and hopefully we can get this talk on our online somewhere so we can see it.
It's online now.
Yeah.
I'll leave some of my cards here.
Yeah, if we can follow up with you and get in touch, that would be
I've got some follow-up stuff too around like some of the financing, municipal financing questions that were asked, and just a couple of questions here. I'm happy to follow up on that. And please be in touch. Like think of the university as a resource, and think of this program as a resource. And if you have questions about moving ahead, like don't be afraid to reach out again.
cool.
And I think you guys have a lot to work with, and you're in really good shape. And you got great ideas.
Cool.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed the book.
Excuse me, I just have to go to the bathroom.
Thanks,
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for some, Chris.
We finally meet.
Yeah, I was finally meeting. It was good, man. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Were you in this program?
No,
You were somewhere else?
Yeah, we were,
Chris is in
Michelle, so
Oh,
we're
yes.
emailing, and we met at the Local Economics Conference.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. Were you at the Senate?
Yeah.
Okay. I was there around. Were you there on the last day? Yeah, I was there. We did the proaction program.
Oh, we had an alumni mixer that we had there.
So we're having a short break here.
Learning to action.
Small was beautiful.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, could I just, I wanted to get a picture.
So, Michelle, are you on the council there?
No, just on the committee here. But yeah, I had emails because we were talking about, I was interviewing for the position at SFU doing the managing the sustainability and research. And then connecting that with the CEP program. I get that.
And they're interesting
We'll talk
problems.
about that for sure. Because
And challenges, I mean, they ended up with us.
there's like a learning living labs
We really-
program that they're
we
launching,
have
which I'm
minutes.
coordinating. And it's all about using all the existing university operations as like a living lab for all the research.
Right there, front and center. And also will be interested to see us. So that, yeah, just trying to think about, well, that's great, because that means we're coming in. But for some time now.
Do you know Curie Herter as well?
I'll
She
react to
did
that.
the local economic development.
Okay.
That's
The Trust Canada. And so she popped up numbers.
Can I just wonder first, if you need a ride, if you want to work, if you need a ride,
Doors
go
open.
up to the public.
Hopefully February, February.
So Steph, Cheryl's here till
11, yes.
jump in with Cheryl now.
Okay.
Okay.
Cheryl, are you still with us?
Cheryl? Hello?
Cheryl, are you there?
She might be on her short break. So.
She's got a meeting at 11. She might
Oh,
be-
does she?
She's having absorbed and prepping for it. Hello? She was here
Do
earlier.
you have a way of texting her? Or something?
I didn't
We'll
email her.
come back to her if she comes. So let's, we've got half an hour really to get through the other thing. So council update.
They mentioned here of the rural dividend letter to Minister Donaldson. A letter did go forward to the minister. He's in charge of rural development, and it was to get eligibility for Bowen to apply on an ongoing basis for rural dividend funds. So we haven't heard back, and Cheryl may have an update because the letter was prompted in part by her suggestion. Municipal Housing Advisory Committee was established at, it would have been the November 27th council meeting. The terms of reference have to be worked through, and I expect that there will be advertising for members of that committee in the coming year. There's currently the survey that's mentioned at the tail end of the minutes from our last meeting. So there's a survey in progress on municipal services, transportation, emergency preparedness, and a significant part of that survey is on housing as well. So the results of that will be released to the public probably at our January 8th council meeting. I think that's right. I think that's the date.
The results will be on January?
Yeah.
What's the deadline for the survey?
20th of December. So
December 20th?
Yeah, so next week. And then the strategic planning session, as I mentioned, was held last Monday, and yeah, actually this past Monday. And licensing was added to the list of priorities to implement. The process with the strategic planning is that we have an all-day meeting, we bash out the basics, and then the notes go to the CEO and to the mayor and to me, and we craft something from that, and then it is vetted by municipal council. So likely the document will go to council end of January, beginning of February.
Just a quick question, Maureen. So on the Housing Advisory Committee, it's going to be a committee of council like this.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that this committee is not really going to be involved in housing anymore?
No, it doesn't mean that. The terms of reference for this committee have to be established still.
Right.
So what they'll be focusing on is still going to be up for debate. There'll be a committee of the whole in January where all of council talks about that, because there simply wasn't enough time to get to the depth that we needed on this particular issue as part of the one-day strategic planning session. Housing will touch all sorts of committees. So the advisory planning committee, for example, will continue to talk about housing issues within the framework of the mandate.
Okay. Question about that. The improved service delivery not happening working group was going to have someone from EDC, someone from MTAC. Will that be the case with this one? Is it all members at large, or will you be drawing from other committees?
I honestly do not know. What we've got at this point is the commitment to establish the committee, and the discussion that happens at the CAL will inform that. We're also we're meeting with Selena Robinson next week. She's the Minister for Municipal Affairs and Housing, and also responsible for TransLink. And we have brought her up to date on sort of where we're at with a number of projects in the community. One of them being the Grafton Lakes project that was given third reading passed at our last council meeting. So that's a pretty big piece. But we have had bubbling away in the background a basic housing project that has gone fairly far in terms of process. And the thing that is stalling it is a commitment for funding from the province. And as the feds have gotten clearer on what they're prepared to support, not super clear, but clearer, the province is in a position where they're prepping for their federal budget at this point, and housing will be a big part of that. So our meeting with Selena is actually at a good time.
Okay, province will assume Cheryl's she's still on there.
Cheryl, are you there?
Yes, I am. I've been listening.
Hi.
Hi. So an update from the province. So I just wanted to say thanks to Wes for the presentation this morning, very informative. And I think as our ministry proceeds with its rural development planning and thinking, that I know already we've been looking a lot at, so there's been a lot of thinking related to community economic development and what that means in terms of rural development for BC moving forward. So a very informative presentation, so thank you for that. In terms of the BC rural dividend, I thank you for copying me on the letter that went into the minister. Has Bowen Island received a formal response to that letter?
Not yet.
Okay. It is. I do understand it is in progress. I haven't seen the final draft, as that comes directly from the minister's office. So once that's received by Bowen Island, if we could perhaps set up a call just to debrief next steps. But I think it's very valuable that Bowen Island is putting that forward. And as Wes is speaking about, you know, all of the opportunities to engage related to community economic development and economic development in Bowen, some additional capacity in terms of funding often helps as a catalyst to some of those projects. And just as, you know, in parallel, I know you referenced Salt Spring Island in the letter.
Yes.
And Salt Spring in 2 rounds has received, Salt Spring Community Economic Development Commission received $72,000 the first round for implementation of a program that they were offering, and then the Salt Spring Island Farmland Trust received $100,000. So there's $172,000 that has been able to assist the community within 18 months related to whether it's economic development or community economic development projects. So if we could debrief that upon the receipt of that letter, I think it is an area to continue to pursue for Bowen Island, because I think it could help you out in terms of resources. Also in terms of resources, just wanted to reference and do a reminder, I'm sure folks are aware of the BC Canada Job Grant. So that's a program, for those that may not be, it's a program to assist existing employees with additional training to make Canadian companies and BC companies more competitive. The program had been fully subscribed, but there has been additional funds put in the program, so it is not fully subscribed. It does go on a first-come, first-served basis. So if there are companies that are interested in applying for funds for their employees for training, that's available for training that takes place from now until March 31st, 2018. And it's also available for sole proprietors. So if there are individuals that are looking for specific training as entrepreneurs in your community, they can look after that. I've also seen some communities utilize the Canada BC Job Grant in creative ways to do training for groups. So I'm just thinking here on the Central Island, Community Futures put together a sales mastermind training for 8 businesses in the community and did it through the Canada BC Job Grant. So instead of paying $300 each for the training, the businesses were able to get it for $100 per business. So happy to explore those ideas if folks are interested in that moving forward. And Canada BC Job Grant pays for 2/3 of the training per employee, up to $10,000. But you can also apply for smaller amounts as well. So we're seeing more and more companies in British Columbia take advantage of that. We really want to make sure companies on Bowen and in rural BC are tapping into those funds as well. And I've tried it. It's also, by way of update, the posting has gone out for the regional manager position that will be in your region. So we do anticipate that there will be someone on the ground for Bowen Island Sea to Sky at the end of January. So we'll likely be setting up some formal meet and greets with the commission at that point in time.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Well, thanks, Carol. Okay. Tourism. Anybody here? Nobody here from tourism. So. Oh, Jackie.
No.
No, you're not.
No.
Michelle, you're not.
There was
There
notes,
was a-
but it was
yeah,
very brief.
So Murray did send in a quick email, I think.
It sounds like it's in an airport or something?
Yeah, he's using
Bragging.
Well, I know I'm going to be meeting with tourism in the new year, as I said, to talk about Village as a venue with Tina and Murray, because they're really interested in, I think,
Oh
moving
yeah,
us
you mentioned
forward.
you in here.
Yeah, and I think just this little conversation we've had with Wes, I think has been quite interesting and intriguing to me. So connecting that up with what we do at the summit at the group on January 23rd. I just feel some stirring in the pot. So at any rate, I'm going to work with them a little bit over the next year. We'll start with a meeting and we'll just see where it all goes. So.
That's good. Cultural master plan.
Right, so I think you're all aware that the cultural master plan was adopted as by law by municipality-led council. I think it was October or maybe early November, which is great. And the Arts Council actually had a board meeting last night. Currently in their work plan, there are 9 of the 36 priorities as part of our work plan. And there will be a strategic planning session early new year, so they'll be reviewing that and possibly adding or changing that up a bit. But we do need to establish a cultural plan review committee, which was the next steps after the acceptance of the plan as a bylaw. And so we have identified there's two board members. Staff from BIAC would also be on that, but we are needing to invite council liaison, BIM staff member, and then we also will attract a member from the public. So we're hoping to move forward on that in the early new year. And the role of that committee really is to assess the status of the recommendations, identify proposed needed additions or amendments, prioritizations or deletions of recommendations, and present status report to the municipality. So the intention is that they would meet maybe 3 times a year if necessary. And so we'll be looking for candidates or participants in that. And we also are going to have a bit of a celebration around the cultural plan. So this is in the Cove Commons. So early February we have a tentative date set up. So February 10th is our potential date, so we'll be inviting the community to that and to extend it quite broadly in terms of the recommendations in the plan and how it is inclusive of the community as a whole. So that's, yeah, we can mark that date. We'd love to have as many of you there as possible.
Can I just make a recommendation on future agendas that we change that to Arts Council updates as well now that we finished the plan, and just speak more broadly about what the arts issues are, because we've got that ongoing relationship with the arts. Does it make sense?
Yeah. So I don't have much to update other than just having done cementing in the lodge for the summit and setting up a save the date for the summit. I mentioned to Rod that we have an EDC mailing list that goes through our website's program called Cake Mail. It's over 100 people, I think, but it's not the same as, I'd like to get more names on it, so I haven't sent the save the date to any of the people who are on the business licensing, intermunicipality business licensing list, which are the contractors, mostly, just to keep it clean.
So just filming on the summit, so Chris and Robin, you've been working on the summit. Are you okay? You need some more support here, but are you a little committee to doing that? Or?
I think we're good. Well, we're good for the moment. I think we're going to need some support for sure. Steph's been handling the logistics and
in January.
The agenda. Yeah, in the new year.
We should make
it's
this.
It's an agenda item.
Yeah, so next time it's going to be an agenda.
Yeah. No, it is today.
Oh, it is today.
10 minutes from now.
Okay. All right, good. Thanks. Business license.
We're actually on time now.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've got anything more to add. It's in staff's hands.
Okay.
Now we're ahead of time.
That's great.
Yeah, we're winning.
Okay, Robin.
And hi, folks. I'm afraid I need to bid you adieu to head to my next call. So just wanted to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and talk to you in the new year.
Okay.
Thank you.
You too. Take care.
Right.
So, the summit.
Summit.
The summit.
Never makes me do this.
Okay.
So the work that I've done, and I apologize for not sending this out, this is where I need to learn the protocols about, do I email this to everybody or just to us? But anyways, I've created the outline of an invitation, which obviously needs work, but I'm assuming that's where staff can kind of come in and make it pretty and fill in the details. But I only made a few copies, so anyways, I'll hand them around. And the idea, this came out, and actually I did Chris's art of hosting workshop, so we worked on this, or we'll have to share. So during that, I actually used one of the sessions and had a few other people, and we brainstormed ideas, and we came up with this idea of creating a postcard, and that would be sent out to businesses, possibly handed out, ideas of maybe getting people to hand them out individually, like in person, and have chats. And the idea is on one side would just be all the kind of, you know, be some pictures, logos, there'd be details of the actual logistics. And then on one side, I've written there, is a bit of a story about like, why does the EDC matter to me? Like, why are we doing this summit? What does it matter? All that kind of thing. So if a few of us could write a little blurb like that, if that, you know, sounds good to you. And I thought, again, this is where the staff could come in, the communications department, we could use the 4 mascots. So if we had 4 stories and we had the 4 mascots, and we could create different postcards, but that's just an idea. And so, yeah, like I don't know about printing costs and what all that stuff. So you have a little story, and then on the back is the RSVP. So people can put in, if they want to actually come, they can write their own little story. They can give us feedback. Why is this important to them, or what do they want out of it? And then we're actually asking them, and these are just suggestions, but we're actually asking them, what do they want to talk about? What's important to them at this meeting? So it's meant to be really an engaging, like, why is this important? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to us? What do you actually want to talk about? So that's the idea for the invitation.
Can we, that's great. That's great. Can we add tourism as one of the subjects?
Oh, absolutely. This is just a draft, so that's the whole point, is we can add or change or whatever. I mean, I think housing really should be on there. I think that's a burning question, but I'm happy for tourism to be on there. We can take out some things.
These were ones we came up with as we
Yeah,
were
these were, yeah.
designing and planning.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yes.
It's okay.
I should have brought more, but.
Can I get a sense of how you see this being distributed? I mean, is this a print card?
Yeah, the idea is it's an actual postcard, like it's printed. And so I don't know what you usually do. Do you mail, would this be mailed out? Would this be, I mean, if there's a budget, again, I don't know what the budget is, I have no idea. So in theory, I think I'd like to see it mailed out to, if we have some sort of contact list. I think there'd be a digital equivalent. We'd have to figure that out. So it would be an email, a visual, somehow, and then people, I don't know how maybe it's some sort of link to a,
You can even do a PDF and people, a
PDF?
fillable PDF,
yes,
and they can
perfect.
just return it.
So maybe that would work.
It's really simple.
Yeah, so there'd be a digital version as well as
Yeah,
a hard
if it's
copy.
a physical postcard, how are they going to send it back? Are they just going to...
I think we could either have a Dropbox or they could mail it if they wanted, but I guess actually we'd have to figure out how they mail it. But yeah, I think the idea is maybe we could talk to either the general store, or it could be, I'm sure at Municipal Hall we could have a Dropbox. There could be contact details for an email. Again, maybe a link to a PDF or a form online or something. I'm not 100% clear on those logistics, but that's a good question.
I think it should be an electronic response.
Yeah.
I think if the couple people want to drop it off, or drop off at Municipal Hall.
Yeah,
right?
and I think it's because there are some businesses who aren't very digital. So I like the idea of providing them with something that they can handwrite and just pop into a box if we can work it out at general store, at the Ruddy or something. Yeah.
Do we have to have a list of RSVPs for ordering food? And
Yeah, we
So
gotta have an idea of numbers for
So
sure.
deadline,
Yeah.
maybe we need to RSVP by.
Yeah, okay, that's a good idea. So yeah, let's put that down.
Can we do a contest as well? So if you RSVP by whatever, you
That's a
could
good idea.
eligible for a $50 restaurant gift certificate on Bowen Island or something.
I think that's a good idea.
You get 2 glasses of wine if you register before.
Is that often people RSVP and then don't show up? I think...
Well, we're
Well,
going to
you
send
have
you
to
around
show
to
up.
grab them out of their households and bring them to the summit if they said they were going to be there.
Well,
We
how
need
did
some
you know what,
muscle.
Chris, last year was the
That's what I was gonna say.
RSVP list matched for this
It was
event?
very well attended last year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
it was a good
Okay.
match.
I think the fact that you provide food and
Yeah.
drinks is a huge draw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
My sense of the way people were invited last time, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed a lot more targeted than just an open invitation to
Mhm.
anyone to come
Yeah.
to the event. I mean, there really was a concern about balance. And once that targeted appeal had finished and we knew how many people we had, that's when we opened it up a little bit more broadly. But we made sure first that we had a mix of people who would be responsive to the topics and informed, and not just coming because of the food and wine.
Right.
So can Steph receive email responses and coordinate that or something?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
because that.
One of the things I had thought of is it would be nice, and I don't know who does this, but maybe, one Saturday afternoon or something, it would be nice if a few of us could actually go and hand deliver these and talk to people. So maybe we pick a time when the businesses aren't that busy, but going in and saying, hey, we're having this event, like, and hopefully there would be an opportunity for a one-on-one, and that's why I think I like the idea of the physical card, because you can go in with a stack of them and say, hey, here's the thing, we'd really like you to come to this, here's why, you know, and that's where kind of the story comes in, and then we want to hear from you about why it's important. So yeah, I think that, I agree, I think that one-on-one, actually, personal invitation is important.
Mm-hmm. I would say, if we're talking about the contractor group, a telephone call is probably the best.
Okay.
Also, some of the, I set this on the date, save the date, and received some RSVPs, which I wasn't asking for.
Right.
But you gotta realize, we've got an in-group here that they're waiting for the EDC summit, right? So you wanna get new people, but also there are a lot of converted that are just kind of poised and ready to go. And I'm also a bit concerned about timelines. If I missed anything when I was out of the room, we've got like 4 days until Christmas break, and then I'm back on the 8th.
I would suggest that we, it might be better, I mean, if we can do electronic invitations by groups, a balanced group, then see who we get for the replying, and then if we don't have enough people, we can do a card and we can talk to them. But we're adding expenses by doing a card when we could actually just do it electronically and ask people. Would that work for you? Or do you think we should go ahead with the card?
Well, I mean, I'm aware that there's timelines and cost issues, so I mean, I don't want to, again, and I'm kind of new to this, so I didn't do it last time. I don't know what you guys did last time exactly and how, because you got a, like I say, got a great turnout last time, so happy to also repeat that. And I think this translates into digital, like it's the concept of the information that's in there. So I mean, it doesn't only work on a Coast Guard, it does work digitally, I think, to a certain extent. So
that's what I was going to suggest, is design it on a PDF, and it would also work as a card, and it wouldn't be expensive to print out black and white. A number, you could do it 2 up on a page and it'd be pretty cheap.
I don't think the expense is the issue, I think it's the time.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
So we should try and get this out in the next week or so.
Oh, okay.
Get the invitation out next week or so.
Well, if it doesn't go out by the 8th, then stuff isn't sent, or by Thursday, let's say, then it's not going out to the 8th, if it's going through your.
It's going through me.
Yeah.
It's gotta go out.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go out before Christmas.
It's gotta go for Christmas. It's
Yeah.
the Christmas
And
time.
it needs a reminder on the 8th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
But so then, my question then is, what is it? We're still, do we have speakers? Where are we at with what is being
No, because part of this is, we're asking them what they want.
You know what, with respect, I don't know that we're gonna have time for that.
Yeah,
because
That's what I'm feeling.
So can I just say, we know we're going to have a business license presentation, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be important.
Yeah.
And we know we're going to have a business license discussion around the implementation of those kinds of things. So my request is for Maureen, Rod, Barry, one or more of the 3 of you to start preparing that. So you'll know that you're going to have some time on the agenda to do that. I think we've got an opportunity, actually. Robert and I were talking about the substance of the dialogue that would happen at the day, and I think just even listening to Wes has made me start thinking a little bit about, it'd be really interesting to ask some broader questions about how is the economy, like this question up here, what's the economy doing for us? Or what do we need to begin to think about in terms of the economy doing for us rather than us doing for the economy? So there's some stuff in there around the CED approach, and we know we want to have a conversation about tourism as well. We want to have a conversation about how the summer has been. So in terms of presentations, business licensing is going to be critical. It's actually going to be a draw, I think, for a lot of people to come in because it's practical. It's going to answer a lot of questions they have about where we're at. And it's also developmental because we're still in the place of being able to create and craft stuff together. And that's what a lot of people really appreciated that last year when we did that. But I think issues around housing and sort of the CED vision kind of piece, I think those are
You're putting housing and CED on the same boat?
I think we're just going to have to we're thinking through, because they're not different issues, right? So tourism, housing, local economy stuff are not different issues. So it's a question of what we're thinking through is how we can have the conversation in a way that kind of explores all of these issues and harvest stuff out that's useful to us.
Chris, I think to me, you've hit the whole packaging there. Because we focus on the issues that Robin's listed out, or the ones that are decided, and have 2 presentations, I guess, because really there's not more time than for 2
we don't want a lot of
presentations.
presentations.
But the whole thing is framed as this exercise, this summit, is a community economic development tool. Like, this is what we're doing here today as we sit at this summit, is community economic development. And then let people understand that, as opposed to trying to tell them what community economic development is.
On the housing point, on the 8th, we have the presentation of the survey to council. And on the 22nd, my expectation is that council will be having a committee of the whole during the day. It's a daytime.
What was the date of the cap?
The 22nd. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's sort of going to be happening that is more informational. The survey will have information. The COW will have council thrashing through a number of issues. At the summit, which is on the 23rd, that's actually really good. If people have been following along with the survey, the committee of the whole, you can just touch on that briefly. And the materials will be ready to support a housing discussion at the summit itself.
I see an opportunity, and I'm jumping a little bit into process here, but maybe because we know business licensing is probably going to be its own thing. That's very contained, and it's going to be a session on its own. So maybe the second session is almost, and I like your idea that the overarching is community economic development, and maybe it's sort of a World Cafe style, Chris. And we have a table for housing, we have a table for this, we have a table for tourism, we have a table for that, and people can, we'll have a few rounds, and people can either sit at one table the whole time, or they can move around and touch on each of the ones. We can discuss that process.
I know, I have to leave, but I think when you guys, so it makes sense to have a presentation on the licensing piece, right? So you guys can prep that, and then we'll have for the housing thing, I think, I think just a package available there would be great, and it would really help us to be able to host that conversation.
So the main topics before we move on from this is the main topics are business licensing presentation. Introduction to community economic development and how this is in fact a tool of community economic development, and what are the...
John, I think it'll be more conversation around like people's issues of what the impact of local economy is having on their businesses right now. So it'll be a broader issue from that community economic development lens. And we can fold housing into that as well.
And then housing and then tourism. And that'll probably be...
That's it.
And so I still like to have continuity planning.
And we've got a staff member who's preparing to be presenting on continuity. So if that's off the table, we need to let her know. Or is it on the table?
I'd like it to still be in there. I think I'll talk to her. I think it could be a very, very short presentation. It's not a discussion. It's maybe a 10 to 15 minute. This is what business continuity is. You should be aware of it. Take that away with you. So I think it's a great opportunity. So I'd like to, if we can try to keep it on the agenda, I'd like to. The ferry's running 10 minutes late, by the way, just so you know.
Thank you. Can we for the next meeting, come forward with a more fleshed out...
Is the next meeting before or after the summit?
Proposal for
before.
It's before.
Do you need that?
Okay, so when's the next meeting then? Is it Friday, January 12th at 9:30?
Yeah, we'll have the agenda.
We'll have elections then, and we'll also vote on the annual schedule then, because it doesn't have to be, I just picked that date, it's not actually official.
Okay, great. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry, I have to leave.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye, Chris.
Are you leaving?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I've got to head off as well.
So that's the end of the...
That's the end of the meeting.
End of the forum.
All right, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
So what do you want to do?
I did, let me just grab the camera, and I will talk to
Okay.
full attention.
Shannon, thanks so much.
I think she's gone.
Yeah, I think she's...
Merry Christmas, guys.
Merry Christmas.